Okay, and welcome. We are here for the Ed Talks interviews at the University of Lethbridge, and I welcome you to the series. My name is Dr. Ute Kote, and I'm the current Board of Governors teaching chair. So, Oki, and welcome. The Universities of Lethbridge Blackfoot name is Iniscum, meaning Sacred Buffalo Stone. The university is located in traditional Blackfoot Confederacy territory. We honor the Blackfoot people and their traditional ways of knowing and caring for this land, as well as all Aboriginal peoples who have helped shape and continue to strengthen our university community. And today I'm very happy that Dr. Susan Findlay is joining me, my colleague from the Department of Chemistry and Biochemistry at the University of Lethbridge. And most importantly, I'm more than thrilled to congratulate you, Susan, as you have won the 2021 University of Lethbridge Teaching Excellence Award. What a wonderful achievement. Congratulations.
Thank you so much. It's a huge honor. And especially coming off of the extremely challenging year that we've all just faced, both faculty and students, I can't tell you how much this award means to me.
And I'm looking forward to talk with you about what it means and what you've done, not just in the last year, because that was special, but also in your entire time at the University of Lethbridge. But maybe we'll start, and can you briefly introduce yourself to our audience?
Okay, so my name is Susan Findlay, and I've been an instructor in the Department of Chemistry and Biochemistry at the University of Lethbridge for about 17 years, I think. Over that time, I've taught a variety of different courses. I teach the large introductory courses, but my specialty is organic chemistry, and I teach that at both the second and fourth year levels. Prior to coming to the University of Lethbridge, I did my PhD at the University of Calgary. And prior to that, I did my undergraduate work at the University of Guelph. I'm also the mother of 2 young children in elementary school, so that has introduced its own special set of challenges with teaching over the last year.
Great, thanks for sharing that. So, as you kind of shared, right, it's been a long history of chemistry in your life.
Yes.
And we'll talk about chemistry today. But what I'm interested in to hear first is, like, what brought you into teaching?
In all honesty, I don't know that I can really remember a time in my life when I wasn't teaching. I got my very first job teaching when I was 8 years old, tutoring chess to a 6-year-old. And I've been tutoring ever since then throughout high school. It's how I bought groceries as an undergrad in university. I was involved in the Girl Guides of Canada. I was a Brownie leader and a Girl Guide leader, and then later on a Ranger leader. So I've had a lot of different types of teaching in my life. Both within chemistry and also science, public education, and also music.
And clearly now you also teach your own children, especially in this year.
Yes.
So it sounds like a full circle. What do you like about teaching? Like, what is it particular that makes you happy when you teach?
I like being able to have an impact. I like the fact that I can see my students learning and developing and growing as people, whether they're students that I may interact with for a few years or whether they're my own children who I will hopefully be interacting with for decades.
Well, and I'm sure you have now interacted with students for quite a long time. Are you still in touch with some of your earlier students? Have you heard where they're going? What impact happens after they leave the university?
I have certainly had some of the students that I trained as a graduate student go on to professorial positions. One of them is now actually a faculty member at the University of Calgary. We've had students go on to a variety of different industrial positions, academic positions, but in all honesty, the vast majority of my students aren't going on to become professional chemists. When you teach that large introductory course, you're teaching a lot of potential doctors, dentists, engineers, computer scientists, teachers, a wide spectrum of different interests. And so I've had students go on into all of those different fields, and I think one of my big focuses as a teacher is not just to teach chemistry per se, but to really enhance the scientific literacy of the students, to allow them to think about the world as a whole and how science is relevant in contexts like environment, medicine, those sorts of areas.
And you really teach that most important, but also often most challenging course that we have, right? Like first year chemistry has kind of a reputation as being one of those hard courses, and yet it's the entrance course to all the sciences where many students are in the courses. So tell us a little bit, how do you approach this challenge and opportunity? How do you teach first-year chemistry?
I try to really impart the idea that the most important thing is application of concepts. Of course, there is a basic vocabulary. The analogy that I often use in terms of learning chemistry is that it's a lot like learning a language. Yes, you need to learn the words or you're not going to be able to speak it. But at the same time, you can't just memorize a French-English dictionary and say that that means you know how to speak French or English, depending on your starting point. You have to actually use the language in context. And it's the exact same thing with chemistry. We teach the students skills, but the most important thing is that they practice them and that we look at different applications. I try to bring in examples from a wide variety of different fields to spark the students' interest. So talk, for example, about ocean acidification in the first year course, like we're emitting carbon dioxide into the atmosphere. We hear a lot about greenhouse gases, and we do talk about those in a later course, but that also has an impact on the acidity of the ocean and therefore the life there. And so I think that bringing in real-world examples is really important.
That sounds really interesting. I wish I'd had such a first-year chemistry course. You mentioned a lot of applications and practicing and applying your knowledge. How does that look like in your classroom?
Traditionally, I tried to blend your lecture where I'm talking and we have class discussions and make sure that I'm always open for questions from the students, but also then take what I would call activity breaks where, for example, if I'm teaching students how to draw molecules, I ask them to take 5 or 10 minutes to draw a couple of examples, and then we collect them up on the board and we troubleshoot them. And I explain that the main skill I'm actually teaching them there is how to troubleshoot their answers, because we can all go look something up, but we have to be able to create and we have to be able to evaluate what we create and decide if it makes sense to us or not. In the COVID context, I had to adjust that a little bit. I wound up recording most of the lecture materials so that we could focus our live sessions on the question and answer type thing. I've also developed over the years online assignments, so weekly assignments to help the students stay caught up with their materials so that they get practice as we go and can quickly identify any challenging areas that they need to work on, ask questions about, get clarification about.
Yeah, that sounds like you have a really clear structure of all the different elements of what your students are doing. So you mentioned already the pandemic. How did you change how you prepare for your course? It must be very different to prepare for an online course compared to an in-person class.
Definitely. The work that goes into generating a good online course is immense. Going into the year of online teaching where we had enough advanced knowledge to be able to prepare for that, I thought about what were going to be the biggest challenges for the students. And I felt like they were going to be time management and attention span. I don't know about everybody else, but my feeling was if I had to sit and watch live Zoom meetings for 5 or 6 hours straight every day, I would go stark staring bonkers. And so I wanted to make sure that I didn't do that to my students. And what I wound up doing was attempting to condense the material down into videos that were as short as they could reasonably be while not shortchanging the topic. And so if it takes 20 minutes to build a particular diagram, then the video was 20 minutes long because that's the experience, that's the requirement. But if I was able to explain how to answer a question in 2 minutes, then I did. And so the way that I structured the courses then was to have a very detailed checklist in Moodle, which is our learning management system, whereby students could keep track of what they had done and what they hadn't done yet. There was a list of everything that you were expected to do for success in a course. So not only the videos to watch, but which sections of the textbook to read, which practice questions to do, have you done your online homework yet? Everything had a checkbox so that they could keep track of it. I found that because when I teach live, we normally spend a lot of time asking and answering questions and doing activity breaks, the videos themselves did not add up to the full length of what was allotted for lecture. So I was therefore able to also offer a once a week live help session class so that we could have those discussions, so that they could ask me questions, so that we could interact and still build a little bit of community as best as that is possible in a giant first year course.
Speaking of building community and connections, right? I mean, that's one of the challenges online. So what tools and mechanisms did you use to communicate with your students?
Well, obviously we had the live sessions, but we also used a message board system. I've been using those in my hobbies for a very long time now. And what I did was to work with some individuals in other departments that teach first year science courses so that we could try to have some consistency across the different courses to pick message boards that fit all of our needs. In chemistry, we need to be able to write equations. In math, they also need to be able to write equations. So we chose one central system that would allow us to meet those technical needs, but also that met some of the student needs and student preferences. For example, a lot of students are a little bit hesitant to show that they don't completely understand something, but if you allow them to ask questions anonymously, then that really increases their comfort level as to being able to ask the questions that they need to ask. And we would emphasize that if you have a question, you're not the only one who has the question. So there was benefit in just reading other students' questions. And the students were able to answer each other's questions as well. And so if a student had already gotten to the question before I did, I can just give positive feedback. This is a great answer. There was the like button. Everybody loves likes online. And so that worked out really, really well. In the fall, with the really big first year course, I had an excellent graduate student helping me with that as well. So that was really fantastic. But that is something that I've been using to some degree in my courses for many years, but it definitely blossomed this last year. And I'm hoping that now that the students have discovered how fantastic those are as a tool for communication, for quick feedback while you're working on your homework at 11 at night sort of thing, that they will continue to take advantage of those opportunities.
Yeah, it sounds like a really flexible way to stay connected and easy, right? Low barrier. But what does that mean for you? I mean, how many students do you have in your class? And is that even possible to answer all their questions and monitor all their questions? I mean, what does that look like from a teacher perspective?
The big advantage of the message board is that it means that I don't have to answer hundreds upon hundreds of individual emails asking the same question repeatedly. Of course, I still answered questions from students via email if they related to personal information, I need to write a test at an alternate time, administrative stuff like that. But all of the course content I redirected to the message board, because that way, instead of answering 65 different emails asking me about the same homework question, I was able to give a really good answer to potentially the first person who asked it, or possibly another student gave them a good answer, and then we had a follow-up discussion out of that. If the same question got asked multiple times on the message board, then we were actually able to link the same questions to each other, essentially mark it as a duplicate so that the students would be directed back to where the question had already been answered. And then if they didn't feel that their angle on it had been fully addressed, then from there we could follow up, and that way everybody in the entire class gets the benefit from that discussion. Even the students who didn't know that they had that question find out the answer to it, and I'm a big fan of that. Is there work involved? Yes. Is it any more than answering thousands of emails? No.
Yeah, and I mean, that speaks to your engagement with the students, right? Answering thousands of emails. Like, how have you done that in the past? You've always taught this large class, so maybe let's go back a little bit. We talked about the current times, but how did that look like in the past? And then later on, not yet, I will ask you what the future looks like. We'll see. But, you know, how have you made sure to engage hundreds of students in the past?
When we were in person, there weren't nearly as many emails as there were this last year because of the fact that students could ask their questions live in class. They could come up and talk to me at the end of class. It would be very rare for me to actually leave a class right away after it finished. Usually there were at least 4 or 5 students who had a question that they wanted to ask or something they wanted to discuss on the way out. And so there was a lot more in-person interaction. I have always maintained what I call an open door policy with regard to office hours. My experience has been if I just pick office hours, they're always the worst possible time that nobody can ever attend. So it's just easier for me to say, you know what, if my door's open, drop in, ask me a question. And so because there were all those different ways to find me in person, there weren't nearly as many emails before the last year. But like I said, I had been trying to introduce message boards for a number of years before this, and they tended to work well in those biggest courses, because the thing with a message board is that you have to hit critical mass. If there's nothing posted or only something posted every 2 weeks, nobody's going to bother to check in, and then they're not going to ask their own questions. So once you have even a handful of really keen students or a larger number of occasional visitors, such that there's always something useful to read every day, then people visit every day. And once they're there, then it occurs to them that they have a question that they'd like to ask, and then that provides more content that other people come visit, and really you just have to get the ball rolling, and you sort of have to hit that magical critical mass. And that's been true in my hobby sites as much as it's been true in my work sites.
So you're really adopting the new technology and helping others to adapt too, right? And I think that's what we've seen in the last year. We had no choice, so we are adapting. But it's good to be ahead of this. And I think you obviously are. You had these ideas for many years, you said. So you seem to have used this opportunity. But I wanted to follow up on this another half sentence you said earlier, that you not only did this in your own classes, but you've coordinated it with other courses, so to make a bigger impact, as you said earlier. That's what you like to do. So how do you convince others, and how do you coordinate it so that it's, a broad approach that is effective and easy?
I bugged them via email. So I started off with math because I knew that they were also using message boards and we were using message boards. We just weren't at the time using the same message boards, and that didn't make sense. So I started the conversation about, okay, what are the features that we need in a message board? Because wouldn't it be nice if we could all use the same thing, if we could find something that met all of our needs? So essentially I just reached out feelers to people that I knew taught other large introductory science courses, because they were going to tend to have the same group of students that I was teaching, and basically asked them what they needed, so that it wound up being to some extent a group decision as to what made sense. I believe one of my colleagues was the person who brought in the site that we actually wound up specifically using, so that wasn't my idea. It was just a case of reaching out to people and starting the conversation. I think that's oftentimes the hardest thing to do, is to get over that inertia of everybody being in their own little box and just say, you know what? Let's start this conversation and see where it goes. You can't pressure people because nobody likes to be pressured. It's just a case of what would make this work for you, because I think that this would be best for the students.
Wonderfully said. And I think we just got another glimpse of why you won the Teaching Excellence Award, right? And I want to follow up on that, because I know this is not the only time you've done this, bringing people together, asking for a change where people just hadn't thought about it across boards. Can you share some of the other examples? I've heard about your coordination of chemistry teaching in the department. I also heard about exam scheduling and different topics where you all had your hands involved to make things better for the students. Can you share some of those stories?
Yes, so the final exam thing was an interesting one. We had a system in place which I'm sure made sense from an administrative perspective, whereby if you had class at 8 a.m., you had an exam on Monday, and then 9 a.m. was Tuesday, and 10 was Wednesday, and so on and so forth. And then if it was a Monday, Wednesday, Friday class, it was in the morning, and if it was Tuesday, Thursday, it was in the afternoon. That makes sense on paper until you realize that as a science student, all the science lectures are in the morning and all the science labs are in the afternoon. So that meant that all of the science students, at least in the first and second year, were having all of their exams be in the first 4 days, which was really rather stressful for them. And so we wound up pointing this out, that this was a problem. I had to go through a few different administrative figures to eventually get to the registrar's office to be able to work with them and say, okay, I know that your parameter is that you want a time slot tied to a final exam time slot because that's how you work. But could we try doing it a different way? Could we introduce a shuffle? And so I pulled all of the enrollment data and sort of cross-referenced it with final exams and looked at because some classes don't have final exams at all and didn't need to be factored in here, and basically made a schedule where I identified the most popular time slots and put each of them on a different day, and then just filled in the gaps with the less popular time slots and said, well, could we try this instead? Because then it would ease what we call exam stacking, which is not a conflict. The system completely avoided conflicts because you can't have two courses at the same time. But it didn't avoid students having 5 exams in 3 days or 4 exams in 2 days, which is incredibly stressful on a student. And this really spread them out. And there were concerns that that would always put a specific course at the end of the exam schedule, so we introduced a rotation and basically called it day 1, 2, 3, 4, but we could actually shuffle which day of the week it was. And I think that definitely helped out a lot. It has since been supplanted by an automated timetabling, which I'm happy to be replaced by. If it can do a better job than me with a sheet of paper going, Tuesday, Thursday at 10 seems very popular. Let's not put another popular one on the same time. Then that's great. So that was what we did on that front. With regard to coordination of the courses, I've been coordinating first year chemistry since about my 2nd year at the U of L. And essentially we just decided as a department that because all of our courses build extensively on each other, that it was really important that students in the later courses all had the same background regardless of who taught them the earlier courses. And so we agreed to a common curriculum that we have modified several times, but the concept of having a common curriculum has stuck to this day. And I serve as primary resource person when we bring in new instructors to the group. Then I help them out, share old lecture notes, give them advice as to what works well. We create the tests as a group so that students in all of the sections have all of the same homework, they write all of the same tests, they're evaluated at exactly the same level, which then is more fair because there's no easy sections and hard sections. If a student wants to pick a specific instructor, they're just picking them off of personality, they're not picking them because it's going to have an impact on their GPA. That was more of a formal process. I wound up developing these online weekly homework assignments as part of that because we found that the students who succeeded were the students who practiced a lot, and so the way to improve student success was to make everybody practice a lot. And then more recently, I've started developing what I call a series of exercises on my website, which are not for marks, simply for their own practice. Questions broken down into short worksheets so that they're ideally not intimidating. You don't have to sit down for 3 hours to do a giant chapter's worth of questions. It's here's a page or 2 that you can do in 10 minutes. Okay, there's 6 of them, but 1 of them you can do in 10 minutes. And that I'm also hoping makes the subject more accessible and potentially then gets students working on it on a regular basis rather than saving things to the end and cramming, because that does not work well in this discipline at all. And so I've been building those for the first year chemistry course because a similar concept actually already existed in the organic courses. Professor Dibble had a series of exercises, and that concept we adapted and brought into first year. After I finished making the online homework assignments for first year, I kept going and did them for the second year organic course as well. And I guess that kind of led into me being appointed lecture coordinator for the organic courses as well. But that was really, for lack of a better word, an organic process, because I just realized how strange that was going to sound. But essentially, we just have a group of instructors that teach at that level that are inherently collaborative, and we have been working together for a long time, and we just kind of developed our own common curriculum, for lack of a better way to put it, rather than there ever being an official push for that to happen.
And you mentioned earlier that organic chemistry is really your area, right? That's where you did your PhD work. So before we talk about teaching organic chemistry, what is so fascinating about organic chemistry? Like, why is that the best subject?
Because I love to solve puzzles. When I was in high school, I really liked math, but I also really enjoyed my chemistry class because I liked making stuff change color. That was a very deep reason. But that's seriously why I went into initially biochemistry and later on chemistry. As I went through university, I also discovered that you got to play with really fun toys when you do chemistry. The instrumentation is really fascinating. It gives you lots of great information. And organic chemistry at its core is about piecing puzzle pieces together. It's about making things from smaller pieces using different strategies. And yeah, I love puzzles, and that's all organic chemistry is.
It's funny that you said it's your choice. For me, it's the same, right? I mean, I'm a biochemist, so there's some relation, and we use chromatography to separate and analyze molecules, right?
Yeah.
I always say my chromatography system, that's my toy, right? You can press button and it's moving and it's doing something, and it's like a giant robot, and you can play with it every day.
Exactly.
That must be the same for you.
Yes.
So what's your favorite toy in the lab?
I love NMR. NMR stands for nuclear magnetic resonance, which, if you've ever heard of MRI, of course, stems from NMR. And it's the toy that we use to figure out what the molecule is that we made, either because the output from the instrument matches what you were expecting, or alternatively, it gives you a whole bunch of clues to tell you, you didn't make what you thought you were going to make, but here's some clues about what you did make. Now go figure it out.
Yeah, it's almost like a detective story, right?
Very
you get
much.
some evidence, but then you have to piece it together to understand what is really going on behind the scenes.
Exactly.
How do you teach NMR and organic chemistry at the second year? How do you help the students learn how to solve riddles and not to get frustrated by those riddles?
Well, in all honesty, we do a lot of practice. Obviously, I have to introduce the technique and explain how the different clues work, how the different types of information work, because there's at least 4 different key pieces of information you can pull off of any NMR spectrum. But then we spend at least a week just literally looking at spectra. The students spend some time trying to figure it out on their own, and then when I get a sense that, okay, most of them have worked through this one or worked through far enough that they've hit the roadblock where we need to stop and have a discussion, then we take it up as a group, and then they continue to work on. They also do that sort of activity in the lab as well, so they really just get a lot of practice. I find that by the end of that course, most of the students actually, their favorite part of it was the spectroscopy course. But again, you have to practice. The analogy that I use when explaining to my students that this is the approach we're going to take, I know it's going to feel a little overwhelming at first, but by the end of it, I promise you, you're going to love it, is I say, look, when my kids were really little and they were learning how to do jigsaw puzzles, they didn't even know stuff like, hey, you should put the edge pieces at the edge and that will be easier. They just started trying to randomly fit stuff together. And as they learned rules like, you can do the edges first, or you can find all the red pieces and do them, or there's different strategies, right? There's no one true strategy for solving a jigsaw puzzle, just as there's no one true strategy for solving an NMR. As they develop the strategies that work best for them, well, now my 5-year-old is doing 500-piece Pokemon puzzles, and my organic chemistry students are really quite good at NMR solving by the end of the course.
Yeah, so you really focus on teaching skills, right? Practice and skills. Those are the 2 words I keep hearing. So how do you build this, that they get always pushed but never too much? How do you provide the guidance and the independence so that they become independent but they don't feel alone? I mean, there's a lot of balancing in that teaching, right?
Well, a lot of thought obviously has to go into, for example, the sample spectra that we're going to work through. You start with something that's relatively easy. Well, actually, you start at the very beginning of the whole topic by just demonstrating. This is me solving one. These are all the bits and pieces that I'm doing. And then when it's their turn, you start with something manageable. And then you up the difficulty level just a little bit. And then you up it just a little bit. And then when you get to that most challenging one, it's not the last one, because you don't want people to leave off, oh, well, we got to the point where I got stuck and then I couldn't do it anymore. From there, you follow it up with something that reinforces that, yes, they have developed the skills. Yes, number 6 out of 9 was particularly challenging, but you remind the students that they can do it. They have developed a lot of really important skills. And that way you build confidence, you keep challenging a little bit, but you make sure that after that one really challenging, that you have a reinforcement that yes, you can do this. And when I work through that really challenging one, I point out that the piece that they all found super intimidating, they could actually do 90% of it just ignoring that piece and then filling it in at the end. And I think that's also important, is teaching students to differentiate rather than just looking and going, eek, there's 500 pieces in this jigsaw puzzle. Okay, there's 500 pieces in this jigsaw puzzle. How about you pull out all the green ones, right? Same thing, but in chemistry terms.
But it sounds like you really make sure your students have a success, right? And this experience of they can do it.
Yes.
And it doesn't have to be 100%, but the important point is to focus on that success. And it doesn't have to be perfect. We all make mistakes, but as long as they know they have the overall skill set, right?
Well, yeah, and when we're evaluating that, I mean, I emphasize to them the test question, where I give them a spectrum and they have a bunch of spectra and they have to figure out what it is. It's probably going to be out of 20 marks. One of those marks is for the right answer. 19 of them are for showing that you have a general understanding of what you're doing, the process, piecing things together. Just randomly guessing the right answer is not the goal here. Showing me that you understand the process is the goal here.
Beautiful. And now we need to move on, because the logic connection, and I know a little bit about that, is that you teach first year, second year, but you are one of the actually few teachers on campus who see the students from first to fourth year. So when they just enter university and they just learn how to get around and in their big classes, the chemistry concepts, but then also the very high-end fourth year. So tell us what you do with the fourth year students.
Well, that's my fun class. So that's my medicinal chemistry class. They're all fun, but that's my fun class. And the reason I say that is because in all of my first and second year courses, there are certain check boxes I have to hit, because I've got to prepare the students for later courses. I've got to prepare them for MCATs and DATs and GREs and all of those different professional exams. That course I can do whatever I want. And so I designed it around the learning activity that I feel as a learner I got the most out of, which was something we did in grad school, and it was not a formal part of any curriculum. We just met as the organic chemistry graduate students once a week, and each week one person would bring in a synthesis, so a route to making some sort of molecule, and they put the starting material up on the board, and we would take turns figuring out what happened in each step of that synthesis. And so I wanted to build a course around that, because it allows you, again, to apply the concepts, to apply the different reactions, to puzzle solve. And of course, now that I'm doing it in an undergraduate context, I am always the person who brings in a molecule. But that also means that I can plan to show them how to make some really interesting different pharmaceuticals. So I can definitely increase the interest factor by doing that. And then they take turns, but I also emphasize that just because the one person happens to be at the board writing right now doesn't mean that they're on the spot. They're not responsible for everything. We are solving these puzzles as a group. And so, I mean, if they're going through it and they're just motoring, then I'm going to let them do that. But if they need support, I will either ask them a question, or I might throw out a question to the class as a whole. And I try to create an environment where if the students see that the person at the board needs a little bit of help, that they will actually volunteer without me having to step in, their own hints and suggestions. And we usually get there. It takes a few weeks to get to that comfort level, right? The whole point is creating that atmosphere. But the big thing that I find is important about that is that I don't stop them right away if they're not going in the direction that I want them to. I let them find their own mistakes and go back and fix them, because we learn more from our mistakes than we do from doing everything perfectly the first time. And I encourage participation by offering marks for taking turns at the board and offering marks for offering help from the seed and all that sort of thing. But I always emphasize that the marks are not for getting the right answer. I'm going to make sure they get to the right answer. It's going to happen. But the marks are for engaging in the process, because the learning happens by virtue of engaging in the process. And maybe what they're doing is completely reasonable until they hit a roadblock, because maybe the molecules do that, but hit a roadblock and then go back and go do something else. And that's a good thing for us to encounter and understand. So that course is all about puzzle solving. The two main types of puzzle solving we do are, of course, the figuring out how to make this pharmaceutical, where I show them the drug at the beginning and maybe tell them a few interesting things about it, teach them a few different things about drug design, but then also coming up with ways to make your own target molecule. In their second year organic course, they've learned different reactions that can do different things. In this course, I teach them how to look at something you want to make and break it into more manageable pieces and actually propose, how would I make that? And again, everything with a strong pharmaceutical slant, everything with a strong participation base. And I also then have 3 assignments that support that. We learn how to search the literature and see what everybody else has already done so that we don't reinvent the wheel. We learn how to practice that thinking mechanistic point, but then we also look at existing syntheses and learn how to reimagine them in a modern context, because I feel that it's very important that we be environmentally aware citizens. And so I let them choose some sort of synthesis from maybe the 1970s or 80s. I've got a list prepped for them so that they don't have to totally work from scratch. And they look at it, they try and get in the head of the person who proposed this crazy new synthesis of strychnine or something. But then they say, okay, if I was doing this today, I would want to do it in a more environmentally friendly way. So I'm going to evaluate, how green was this synthesis actually? What sorts of things did they do that we maybe wouldn't want to do today? And how could I improve this? And I think that recognition that there's a lot of different ways to make the same thing, and there's a lot of different decisions that we have to make along the way, is really important, because there isn't just one right answer. Not once you get to 3rd and 4th year university. There's always multiple right answers.
Wow, I think what you just described goes way beyond chemistry, right? Those are really life skills you're teaching them. Mm-hmm. The problem solving, the literature, the alternatives. And I noticed that you always said, we learn. So it sounds like you're really instilling a sense of a teamwork almost in the group. How does that happen? Like, how do the interactions between the students evolve in that class?
So in that particular class, I mean, I'm fortunate because they are 3rd or 4th year students, although they tend to come from a wide variety of disciplines. It's a 4th year chemistry course, but I would say that I've had anywhere from a quarter of the class be chemistry majors and 3/4 not, to probably about the reverse. And by 4th year, a lot of the senior science students already know each other, so there's usually friendships in place there. I try to create an environment that says, you know what, we're all in this together, which means that if I'm lecturing, because that's one of the days on which I'm doing that, I'm not just telling them things. I'm trying to get them to tell me things. And I try to bring in examples. If I happen to know, for example, we're talking about challenges of making really large molecules, and I know that someone's worked in a research lab where they've done that, rather than me saying, well, these are what's difficult about doing this, I'll throw out the question. And if I think that the student will be comfortable with me calling directly on them, then I'll do that. Otherwise, maybe I'll make it a little bit more ended. We do a lot of brainstorming. We do a lot of, okay, we're going to talk about this particular subject. For example, I teach a concept called hard, soft, acid-base chemistry. And so before we talk about that in detail, I'm like, so if you haven't heard of this before, what the heck do you think hard and soft might possibly mean in a chemistry context? And we brainstorm and we think about them. And sometimes they get to what it actually means, and sometimes they don't, but we're able to bring in different perspectives, and then maybe I can call on the students who took in organic and already know the answer. Mm-hmm. But I like to bring in different ideas from different places. I like to make sure that everybody feels comfortable talking, because there is a participation mark, and they can earn at most 1 point per class for speaking up and being active. They need to participate in a fair number of classes. I have a checklist right there, and they see that their name gets checked when they actively participate. And after a few weeks, everybody kind of has a sense of who's more outgoing versus who's more reticent. And so if a hand goes up from somebody who doesn't speak as much, that's who I'm going to call on. And the other students I find are very supportive of that. I've also noticed that, for example, they get more points for taking a turn at the board than they do just for participating for their class. They're very conscious of the fact that once you hit 40 points, you're maxed out on participation. That doesn't mean they shut up for the rest of the course, but it means that they're very conscious of, okay, I need to make sure that the other people take their turns too. So I'm only going to volunteer if nobody else still needs points. And I've found that that has just happened naturally every time I've taught the course.
And that's great, because I think that's what the students then need, right? Once they leave the university and they go on and either go to professional schools or graduate studies or enter the workforce. And all of these environments, they will have to, in one way or the other, work together, right? And I find sometimes we set students up for competition at the university, but that's not really what what they maybe need even more is the teamwork, the collaboration, and say, here's the problem. And the goal is to solve it, not to compete, but to solve the problem, right? Whichever one it is, if it's chemistry or not. So, I mean, maybe turning a little bit around again and coming back to what we talked about earlier. Last year, right, that was a giant problem we've all faced, together or not, in the pandemic, and we're still in it, so we're still facing it, but we've learned a lot. So maybe let me ask you first, like personally, how did you cope? You mentioned you have young children. I mean, there's been so many challenges to teach, to work, to live, to stay healthy. How did you manage?
I didn't sleep a lot, fortunately. No, I mean, the reality is that building an online course takes an enormous amount of work in the creation of the asynchronous materials. And I was very fortunate in that I have a very supportive partner, husband, who took on a lot of the childcare responsibilities in terms of taking them to school, moving our kindergartner from kindergarten to daycare when that needed to happen in the middle of the day. Like it or not, kids need to spend time with their mom. And so my evenings had to be kid time. And I was very fortunate that it turned out that my kids didn't get sent home from school very much during the year, only when the whole province did, not for individual classmate type cases. And so I was able to get a lot done during the day, but I also had to do a lot while they were asleep, unfortunately. I certainly plan to take those materials that I generated moving forward and use them again, because I put a lot of heart and soul into them, and I put a lot of time into them. But I also had very supportive colleagues. When I was working on Chem 1000, our big introductory course in the fall, I took on generation of the asynchronous lecture videos, and I dealt with the message board. But for example, I had very little to do with assessment because there was just no space left on my plate for that. And so my colleagues wrote the test questions, coordinated the marking of the tests, that sort of a thing. So we worked as a team to try to spread out the work as much as was possible. There wasn't a whole lot we could do about the fact that there was simply more work than could actually be done by the three individuals teaching that first year course. And I also, as a result of us not having as many in-person labs as we normally would have, had access to more TA support than I normally would, because normally in chemistry, as I'm sure you're aware, and biochemistry too, almost all the grad students teach labs, and there's very little grad student time left over for doing things like helping marking, offering help sessions, that sort of a thing. That was a little different this year because we had to give up the first semester labs in order to be able to do socially distant labs for the other chemistry and biochemistry courses. And so I was also then able to have a graduate student who was working with me for my other course in that fall, and got to run my tests past her because she'd run help sessions for us for years and I knew it was a good resource. She did all my midterm marking for me because of just how much time it took to generate those videos. So I was very lucky to have a strong support system in place.
Well, yeah, it sounds like you really managed again to coordinate with many people, right? And to build those teams to make it possible for the students and to make it work. But I'm still stunned that you made all these videos because honestly, my own children entered about every second video conference I had. And I had video conference with a kid sitting here. But, that doesn't work when you make a video for class. So when did you make these videos?
While they were at school, while they were asleep. I could edit while they were home. I also helped myself out a little bit by the fact that all my videos are screen share. I mean, you've seen the videos on YouTube where you have the cartoonist doodling away and there's music in the background and they're talking. I took that format rather than this is me sitting talking in front of the camera. And that way, if on occasion, as did sometimes happen, I was halfway through a calculation and the door slammed and the kids ran in screaming, if I was a fair chunk into the video, I could ask them to please be quiet and then erase the calculation and start that page of the video over. And then in post-production, just edit out those 10 minutes of, please let mommy finish what she's doing. But mostly I tried to record in an empty house.
Oh my, so a lot of multitasking and lack of sleep. Well, the students sure appreciate it, right? I mean, you've seen that in the comments, and as I said earlier, there's a reason why you won the Teaching Excellence Award, because, I mean, keeping this dedication up under such circumstances, that truly speaks to you as a teacher, to the benefit of the students. And yes, nothing was perfect last year, but just this willingness to give your best and go beyond, that's really amazing. But now I think it's very important as we see the end of the tunnel, right? We see the light, we see the vaccines, we're talking about students coming back on campus. What is your vision moving forward? Like, what will you keep? What will you go back to? How do you think the future of teaching looks like? It's a giant question. I think there's a lot of things we talked about, but I'll let you start where you find it's your favorite area.
Well, I think a lot of people are going to go in a lot of different directions. Definitely, I'm very excited to get the students back into the lab full time. That, I think, will be really fantastic for them. I am looking forward to getting back in person, but there are advantages to some of these videos. I had students who would be able to watch them multiple times, pause while they took notes. I built in things where, for example, I would explain a concept and run through one practice example and say, okay, pause the video, do the practice example, then unpause it and watch the answer. So I have all of that in place, and I think not taking advantage of that would be foolish. What I would like to do is take advantage of that video content to flip the classroom as much as is feasible, to spend more time working on practice questions in class, because partly I will be there to help them when they get stuck, but also partly students take their cues from you in terms of what is important. And if all you do in class is convey information, then they will feel that the important thing to do is to memorize that information. Whereas if you do take the time in class, and I've tried to do it in the past, but there's always been limited time available. So I did it as much as possible before. But now I'd like to increase the amount of time that we're able to spend working on practice questions. So I felt like in the past, just assigning readings and then having students come in and do practice questions was probably not going to resonate with a lot of learners. A lot of learners these days are much more visual. I feel like videos are more accessible than saying, read the textbook. So if I can ask the students to watch 15 minutes worth of video before class, and then start the class with sort of a question and answer period. Let's discuss what we saw on the video. If there's any burning questions, let's get those out of the way. And then let's spend some time practicing those concepts, those skills that we talked about. And I feel like if that's the emphasis in class, then that's what the students are going to value. And when they go to study on their own, that's what they'll do. Because I feel like the big difference right now between the students who succeed and the students who don't is how they spend their time studying. How much time do they spend doing versus how much time do they spend reading? Reading is important. I'm not saying it's not. You need that basic vocabulary. But if that's all you do, then you don't internalize it.
Yeah, and I mean, this is really the concept of the flipped classroom, right? The idea that the information occurs now at home instead of in the lecture. So they gain the information, and then when you are there with them in the classroom, it's the studying, the practicing. It's almost the opposite to what we've done in the past, where we would lecture and throw so much information at them when they're at university and then send them home and say, and now you learn, right? And now I think we have the ability to really turn it upside down. And at this point, I have to pause because there's the second congratulations I have to extend to you. I congratulated you for the Teaching Excellence Award. But in addition to that, you are also now a teaching fellow at the University of Lethbridge for the next 2 years, right? So what does that mean and how does that tie in? Because I know you talk about the flipped classroom a bit when you talk about being a teaching fellow. So maybe you can explain that a little more?
Well, to the best of my understanding, that means that I get a little bit of extra time to actually work on generating the materials that I will need to do the in-class portion of this. But the other thing that it means is that I will be allowed the platform, I suppose, to help other people who have the same interests. So I already hosted one, I think it was called a classroom conversation or something, where we talked about flipping classrooms and the challenges and different strategies for addressing those challenges. I've learned how to use a lot of different tools over the last several years to help with online message boards, online evaluation, all of those sorts of things. So turn around and teach other people how to use those skills. So I think in many respects it means that I'm recognized as a resource person for the next few years. I think that's mostly what the teaching fellowship means. And so it's a really exciting opportunity, and I'm fortunate that I'm going to be teaching the same class twice in the next year. So I'm going to have one crack at it in the fall and then one crack at it in the spring to fine-tune what hopefully worked and address any challenges and rework anything that needs reworking. I also have, I'm going to be teaching Organic Chemistry 2. I have a colleague who's teaching Organic Chemistry 1 that's going to be working with me because we're planning to flip alongside each other so that the students get used to this concept in the first course and then experience it more in the second course. And then I will take what I've learned from doing that and hopefully bring it into the first year environment in the following year, which of course are much larger classes than what I'll be dealing with in the second year organic chemistry course. So I'm very excited about this opportunity, and yeah, hopefully I will be able to help other people as well as helping my students.
It sounds like you're really at the forefront of the culture change in teaching. And I think not just the University of Lethbridge, but that's what we'll see in the system, because we need to adapt and teach differently, and we need to really learn from the lessons from the last year. And I think what you describe is just spot on, right? Use the video lectures, use the technology so that we can focus on the true learning when we interact between instructors and students. How do you think you will interact with others, and how can you help others to try this radically different approach to teaching in a way?
Well, I mean, in some senses, it has to be internally driven. You don't want to impose it on people who aren't comfortable with it. So in many ways, I think that you convince people that it works by trying it yourself and having it work. I think that demonstrating that this can work is really the best way to sell it. And then I think baby steps. Nobody says that you have to completely 100% flip your classroom and do everything, activities in person, and never stand and write on the blackboard again. If an instructor's confidence comes from that introduction and that presentation of the material, then in some cases, maybe just even showing that integrating more active learning into the existing format, that's still going to help the students. It's still going to broaden that instructor's confidence. And I think that like anything else, these things have to be internally motivated. If people are going to change, they have to want to change. And sometimes that means you have to show people that there's a reason to change. And so, yeah, I think meeting people where they're at is really important. I did a lot over the last year of, for example, training people on how to use CrowdMark, which is a piece of software that allowed the students to write assessments on their own paper at home and then just take a photo of them on a smartphone and upload them to the internet rather than having to deal with, needing constant internet connection for multiple choice online type stuff. Because all of a sudden that was really important to them, because what was important to them was grading written work, because written work shows all the thought process and all the steps. So I think that as people identify needs that are really important to them, then helping with that is helpful. I don't know. And then not everybody needs to go all the way right away.
I think you're saying something really wise there, because we're all coming out of the pandemic being rather tired, right? Lack of sleep, you mentioned it. A lot of new learning, a new type of work, lots of work, and then personal challenges that we've all faced, well, childcare in our case, but there were many different challenges, right? So I really like your idea of, being understanding and compassionate, but still promoting change. And the other word that I've heard a lot today is, using technology smartly to help us make life easier, right? Not more complicated, but easier. And I hope we now have more tools at our hands. So what are your favorite tools? What are the ones you think we can really keep and make our life easier in university teaching moving forward?
Definitely the crowd mark. The ability in those big classes to have 6 or 7 different people marking the same papers at the same time is huge. We used to have stacks of 350 exams that we'd have to divide up between 5 people that meet up and pass them all around, and those were really heavy bags of papers. The fact that everything can be uploaded and then we can all access it potentially simultaneously is huge. The fact that you can associate a comment with a numerical score improves the consistency and fairness in marking immensely. I think that those sorts of things that improve accessibility and fairness are the ones that I would focus the most on. The message board systems, again, that allow the students to post questions anonymously, to answer each other's questions. I chose one where they were also able to make their own private chat rooms if they wanted to chat away from me, and I think it now has video conferencing capability, though it didn't at the beginning of the semester. So again, these sorts of things allow the students to chat, and during COVID that was essential, but even once we're not in COVID, I have students who have families at home. I have students who, when they leave campus at 4 because they've got to go pick up their kid from school and go home, that's it. They're done with campus for the day. The fact that they can use some of these tools to meet up with their classmates is huge. The fact that students can answer questions at the time of day that they come up instead of having to wait until the next morning to hope that I'm in my office is huge. Don't get me wrong, I'm very much looking forward to them dropping by my office again and seeing them in person and writing on the whiteboard. But having that ability to ask the question when you think about it is really big. And the other thing that's really big is seeing that other people have the same questions. And I think that's another advantage of that flipped classroom. It's not just about working on the practice questions together, it's about recognizing that you're not the only person who gets stuck on a particular concept. And learning how to get unstuck is oftentimes the biggest thing. So, the content itself is great and it's important and it all builds on itself and you have to learn it. But learning how to deal with a situation where you're stuck and have skills for getting unstuck is huge.
Yeah, and I think, as you just said, the flexibility that we had to have in the pandemic, I hope we can keep some of that because it can make life easier, in particular when we have other obligations, right? So hopefully we can keep that, but also the importance of connection and support, right? Of not being isolated. That was a challenge, so hopefully that gets easier in the future, but I think we've also just really learn how important that is and how important that is for teaching, because teaching and learning doesn't happen in isolation, right? It happens in that interaction space and that friction of that being stuck and coming out of it together. And that's something that really requires a teacher bringing the students in one way or the other together, in person or in a virtual space, but it's this coming together that we need to do one way or the other. And it sounds like you've found many ways to do the best we can in these conditions, and maybe moving forward we can do the same. Well, thank you, Susan. Thank you for joining me today. It was really a wonderful conversation.
Well, thank you for inviting me.